Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 128. And if you're enjoying Identity Office Hours episodes and wondering how you can support, please visit the LinkedIn page and like it. That really helps us. Our guests today are Andrew Armstrong Musoke, senior research engineer at Carnegie Mellon University, Africa, Afsana Ineza, a student at Carnegie Mellon University of Africa, and Elizabeth Garber, founder of Humanitech, and how some of you in the audience might also know is an OpenID Foundation staffer. So welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. Glad to be here.
Okay, so before we dive into it, we'd like to ask everyone to introduce themselves. So, you know what, Andrew, let's start with you because I think you're the real catalyst behind this episode. So maybe we could start with you. What's your background?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So initially I was trained as a security engineer. Did my master's in IT at Carnegie Mellon University in Africa, and later on pivoted to work in a financial technology company as a cloud and infrastructure engineer, and spent a couple of years there. Left as a senior infrastructure engineer, and most recently started working at the Opanzi DPI network in Kigali as a research engineer, focusing on digital public infrastructures, but mainly digital identity.
And Afsana, let's go with you next. How did you find yourself drafted for an Identity Office Hours live stream?
So as I said, first of all, my name is Afsana Ineza from Rwanda, and I'm currently a student at Carnegie Mellon University, Africa, where I am pursuing my master's in information technology and specializing in cybersecurity. So I found myself in the digital identity ecosystem properly through the Digital ID Hackathon that took us from East Africa to East African competition to the whole Africa competition, ending at the conference in Ethiopia, the ID for Africa conference in Ethiopia.
Great. And Elizabeth, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and Humanitech.
Sure. So my background, I had a corporate career that spanned, more than I want to admit to. Then I found myself learning much more about digital identity. Founded my own company in this space as I became more and more obsessed. But then what I found that I really enjoyed doing is working with the nonprofits in the arena to, whether this is in standards development, capacity building, or just improving the infrastructure that we all rely on online. So I work with a number of different clients. As you mentioned, I'm an OIDF staffer. That's where I'm the director of marketing and strategy. I also work with the Digital Identity Advancement Foundation, operating the Vittorio Bertocci and the Kim Cameron Awards. And I work on matters of global interoperability, which is what brought me to Addis and to ID for Africa, where I met Andrew and Afsana. I think that's enough for now.
Cool. So the topic today is youth-powered solutions for Africa's digital ID future. I think this is related to the hackathon, as we mentioned. So maybe I could start with a question for Andrew. What inspired the creation of the hackathon, and how did it take shape?
Yeah, I think that was a really good place to start, Mike. So, first of all, like I already mentioned that worked as a researcher at the Opanzi Digital Public Infrastructure Network, and this is a network of labs that is looking into how to deploy or implement digital public infrastructures both in a sustainable and secure way. And the whole point of doing this research is so that we can put it out into for the benefit of different countries in the global south to kind of bootstrap their journey with DPI. So within this initiative as well, we have a digital experience center, which showcases the different ways that open source digital public infrastructure can interoperate through different scenarios and use cases. And I give this background because this is the key arena where we have, or personally have met a lot of different stakeholders, from policy, government, implementers, and so on. And the one thing that the one trend that seemed obvious is the fact that there's a very big push for African countries to digitize. And key to this digitization effort is obviously digital identity, which we view as a foundational system or a foundational enabler for this. Out of when we look at digital identity, though, and the growing interest, two questions do pop up, which is how do we avoid vendor lock-in? And second is how do we support safe and inclusive adoption of digital identity? So the hackathon comes within this framework to answer those questions. And first, with the issue of vendor lock-in, it's the answer
Well,
to
before
that
we
is
dive into that, actually,
yeah.
I don't want to be a spoiler, but who won the hackathon?
Oh, it was a team from Senegal
Uh-huh.
uh, called Team Retro, and they had some really brilliant solution. I don't know if I should talk about it right now. But yeah, and Afsana here was on the team that placed second as well.
So Afsana, yeah, congratulations. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about, before we dive into it, what was your project and what was your experience like at the hackathon?
So first of all, my experience with the hackathon was really great because it was in phases. So as I mentioned, we first started at the regional area where teams, because I was in the East Africa, where the best teams in East Africa competed and the top teams had different advantages. So starting from there, we placed first in the regional area, and some of the advantages that we won was to where some of them were laptops and getting internships, which is what I'm currently working in, and also getting an opportunity to attend the ID for Africa conference with another team. So top two teams from the regions, and then getting to ID for Africa. It was a competition across Africa. So the top two teams from every regions were competing, and we placed second. So our solution was basically a use case in the agriculture sector, and
Mhm.
the other teams also had different use cases.
Hmm.
So, in a nutshell, the solution is called Smart Trace, allowing governments and partners to basically provide subsidy, agriculture subsidy inputs, distribution efficiently and fairly. So that is like integrating the biometrics identification for registering farmers and also using a machine learning model to provide allocated subsidy to every farmer.
Hmm. Okay. Um, and um, so the problem you were solving is that this needed identity, because when you're talking about payments, you really need to know the identity is correct. And so it starts with an enrollment of the farmer into some type of biometric system. Um, but, is that right? So you're
Yes,
going out and registering individuals so you can uniquely identify them, and then basing payments on that that original enrollment.
yes. So basically, one of the issues from the literature and the issues that we see in our African context is fraud in terms of
Uh-huh.
people having like double registration, registering twice to be receiving these advantages or subsidies two times, while
Yes,
those who need them don't receive them. So that's where that solution was coming in.
I see. Yeah, I think that happens pretty consistently in the world. So, okay, Andrew. So now let's pivot back to like um, So maybe we can dive into, before we talk about the vendor lock-in, which I do want to talk about, because I have
Sure.
some thoughts on that myself. But I'm curious, you mentioned that part of the goal um, was to build local know-how and capabilities in digital identity, because you see that as key to building digital identity and digital public infrastructure in these countries. And a lot of these services are hanging off the identity, whether it's payments or licensing or other things, or even government workforce. Digital identity is really at the heart of all this. And so I guess with regard to the hackathon, so you come up with a hackathon, but so how did the organizers of the hackathon see this as connecting to to solving real world problems? Like, how do you get from like the challenge, and what was the goal of the hackathon then specifically?
Yeah, I think so. The goal of the hackathon essentially is to source contextually aware problems, and that touches on your point of trying to solve real world problems instead of coming up with the use cases theoretically. So initially, that's what we were doing at the lab. Is we're seated down and just trying to come up with different what we think could be the issues that people are facing. And every time we would try to take that out of the lab to go into a community would then find out actually they don't really care about this, which is an interesting find. But with the hackathon, we are looking at students who we believe are the people who are actually closer to the problem, and we prioritize lived experience. By this I mean to participate in the hackathon, at least for the currently, you need to be a resident or a citizen of an African country, and then we want to hear first the story behind why you think a problem is a problem, right? So like Asanat is talking about, it's something that she has seen prior within her experiences and so on, and then we make sure that the students uh, proposing problems that they themselves have experienced either directly or indirectly, and then work with them to transfer this into solutions.
Could you talk about maybe some of the other projects? Like, I'm just curious, like, what was the first phase project, or maybe were there some other really other standout projects that are that could help give us an idea of what students came up with?
Yeah, no, I think we had all the top 8 projects that made it to Addis Ababa were all very interesting, and I'd be happy to share with your audience the link to view more in detail. But I'll
Uh-huh.
just talk about the top 3 in short. The first place went to Team Retro, like I mentioned, and they were using digital identity to enable first responders to access critical health information
Hmm.
of an unconscious patient in the case of an emergency. So this is sort of like how Apple has the contact emergency
Mm-hmm.
and if the phone is off. But in most places in Africa, you won't find people with access to iPhones. So being for a first responder to be able to use your thumbprint and get information like blood type, that's really life saving. Second team was Smart Trace, and Sanat has talked really well about that. And the third place went to a team from Botswana called BotsBots, and they were linking the National Tax Registry with the school loan issuance system so that they can ensure timely and proportionate payments of student loans. So the problem here that they're trying to solve is defaulting or defrauding the loan system, which then has the turnaround effect that the next set of students will not have access to funds to support their education. So by doing this, ensure that at least a large portion of the funds can be recuperated.
Yeah. All of these use cases seem very focused on sort of citizens. Um, but there's a lot of challenges around trust, around does one agency trust maybe an identity from another agency? Did you see any projects that were sort of addressing some of the challenges in managing trust, especially as you have such a distributed, federated environment? There's so many countries, so people cross borders. They have to present IDs, maybe issued from other countries. Um, were there any presentations sort of in this area about how to enable trust?
So no, they were not. I think the use cases being citizen focused is mostly because that's what we were sourcing. We were focusing on getting use cases, citizen centric use cases first, and not trying to solve some of those like the meta problems of trust and so on, because we believe that some other hackathons that are trying to solve pretty much the same issue as well.
I see. Elizabeth, maybe it's a good chance for you to say a couple of words. What brought you out to this hackathon? And I was making my plug for Federation. Um, do you see any connections with this hackathon and opportunities for OpenID?
Sure thing. Yeah, so I was out at ID for Africa, which is an incredible conference because it brings together just one of the most diverse interdisciplinary audiences that I see at conferences. So you have academics doing these hackathons, amazing people like Andrew and Afsana. You also have standards bodies like myself, like Gail Hodges was also there, the executive director at OpenID Foundation. Many other standards bodies were in presence. You have the development organizations, the funders of international projects related to digital identity, and really driving a lot of the development of these solutions in a lot of parts of the world. And then you also have representations from very senior officials from the governments themselves all across, not just Africa, but certainly all across Africa. So it's a really great place to get a wide range of ideas and just to really expand your thinking about what's happening in the industry. So I was there from a city hub perspective. I was there looking at global interoperability, meeting with a number of the senior leaders from African states. And one of the things we were trying to do was to expand our awareness of what the context is for cross-border use cases regionally in Africa. That's what brought me out there. We spent half a day with officials talking about real-world use cases on the African continent. But I suggested that we, connect Andrew and Afsana to you, Mike, because I thought that this example of the hackathons was such an incredibly powerful concept. It's not something that you see a ton of, and I would love to be a bridge. I thought it would be useful to be a bridge between the community of innovators on the African continent and the community of innovators that you and I most often encounter
Right.
in the US. And certainly the examples, the use cases that we saw in the hackathon, I mean, I don't know the detailed architectural for each of these, but I certainly think that there are opportunities for the OpenID Foundation. And certainly when you're talking about the roots of trust and how do actors in these ecosystems establish trust with one another, Federation's a great example. So as these things take root, I would certainly love to bring OpenID into the conversation.
Cool. And just responding a little bit about the first responder use case, just for fun. I actually worked on a first responder proposal in the U.S. And actually, first responder is quite a federated environment because you have local police, you have local fire, you have state police, you have federal police. I don't know if it's as complicated in Senegal, but there's also private contractors who are important. There are hospitals. And so actually a lot of these systems have their own identity and need to interoperate, not even cross-border, just like interagency, one department of the government versus another. Yeah.
Riffing on that a little bit more, City Hub actually, and there's a report on our website, which we can link to somewhere. We had a good discussion about disaster relief in the context of disasters across Japan and the United States. And there are all sorts of different challenges depending on the jurisdiction. I know in Japan there was challenges exchanging data from one municipality to another. Because different rules. But that's probably off track for
Going out on a limb, are the Japanese better at it than we are? Just at a high level?
it's apples and oranges, I think, Mike.
Something tells me they are.
uh,
Um,
very, very, very different contexts.
yeah. Well, so I do actually want to take. I wasn't dodging the vendor lock-in question, Andrew. I do want to take that one. I just thought it took more time. So let me just maybe set the stage a little bit, and just say, as a company that publishes software, I feel like people underappreciate the patching of the software. They love to buy new software, but really it's like the software is in production for like a decade to 2 decades, and every month there are CVEs, critical vulnerabilities, in the underlying libraries. They need to be patched. It's like a bridge. You start painting the bridge, and by the time you get to the end, you have to start painting it again. It's never ending. And so the truth is that this software rots fast, and it's really hard to keep it good. It's really, if you're talking about mission critical software, where the root of the trust of the transaction is rooted in the identity of the person, it's really important that this thing has the latest patches. And in order to keep up with that level of commitment, it's very hard for public sector to do that. So to hear end users maybe say, oh, well, we don't want vendor lock-in, tell me a non-commercial way that you're going to figure out how to get your patches monthly for 10 years without having a commercial relationship. And when you have a commercial relationship, that implies some type of vendor lock-in, because vendors can't employ professional developers for long periods of time without long-term contracts with their customers. So I just don't really understand the whole no vendor lock-in thing doesn't compete, because I don't see a world where you don't have vendors.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Yes. Thanks, Max. Well, I think you're right. That's a very loaded question. I'll just try to take off bits by bits, and yeah. So when we're talking about vendor lock-in, especially the digital identity for African countries. At this point, we're looking at it as a public infrastructure. It's something that is critical for the nation and so on. So if we do not have the capability within the nation to service our own very critical infrastructure, I mean, there's no difference between a digital identity deployed at national scale to maybe a military installation or a critical national hospital and so on. So it's not.
It's a national security issue, because it's a critical
Yes.
capability, and you want to make sure this critical capability exists within your country. I understand that. It doesn't mean you have to write the software, though.
No, you do not have to write the software, but you should be able to support it and have options. I think it's all about options at the end of the day. If you're having proprietary software that only one person or one entity can support, develop or support on or implement a feature, then you are essentially the entire nation is emboldened to that entity. I'd like just to give you a small anecdote. In one of the, I was speaking to a director general for one of the countries, I can't mention which, but they say that to add just one district onto their national identity system, this is not a digital identity system. The conventional system. They requested $100,000 to include as an option when someone is registering, to include a new district that had been formed. And I think obviously this becomes prohibitively expensive, especially if you're talking about countries that have very limited budgets for this kind of things. And then
Hmm.
what you end up with is systems that are much older, because true, you need someone to patch it with a commercial interest. But if you do not have the money to fund that commercial entity, then you still end up in the space where you're having outdated software and so on. So at least I don't have an answer, because that is an open question. What's the best commercial model for digital public infrastructures? But at least having capacity within the country is one step towards that. And obviously partnerships, having private-public partnerships. I'll just give an example of DHIS2. It's a health, open source health digital public good that I think
Hmm.
has a very good model where they train local local software companies to be able to support commercially the government. So finding hybrids in that sense, I think, would be is a really
Okay, I have a
good way.
question for you about that one then. So, sorry, Elizabeth, go ahead.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I wonder if you're conflating the ideas, Mike, of vendor lock-in and having a sustainable, healthy vendor relationship as well. So
Hmm.
there's a big difference between
Nobody wants to get extorted.
nobody wants to get extorted.
Yeah.
And so building local capacity is part of the solution. Building using open standards and robustly tested international standards is another. There are all sorts of safeguards. One of the projects that I work on is the Digital Public Infrastructure UN Safeguarding Initiative. Like, totally botched the long name of that, but
Yeah, is that part of the DPGA sort of umbrella, or
it's
aligned interests?
there's a Venn diagram in which they
Yeah,
are they overlap, but
yes,
they're not the same thing. They're certainly aligned. But
yeah.
I think all the points that Andrew made are valid. But so is the truth that you do need to have vendor relationships as much as possible. I think nations and regions would like to be digitally sovereign and not dependent upon data that's hosted in other countries and governed by the laws and the rules of those other countries. But
Right.
your point is
I actually I want to take Andrew's example of this. So it's a health insurance software package. It sounds like they're part of the DPGA, probably. Local integrators then go and do the work. And my question would be, who funds the fixing those CVEs? Is that whoever writes the software? Everyone, all those integrators are relying on patches. They need to patch monthly, just like everyone else. Are they funding up money so that the developers who are doing the core development can actually put those patches out on time? Or is there some other, what's the funding model for that, for the project that's making that software? Andrew, I'm curious if you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not clear on the whole inner workings, but
Hmm.
for what I know is that there is DHIS2 is um, overseen by HISP, HISP, which is a non-profit in Oslo, also under a university, actually the University of Oslo, and they do set up this kind of nation level HISP. They call it the HISP network. So there's HISP Rwanda, for example,
Yeah.
and well, when they are either implementing or deploying for the government then pays them. But within that framework, they have obligations to maintain and update um, the upstream repository of DHIS2, and the overall maintainers are the nonprofit in Oslo.
Hmm. So, I see this model a bit where there's some donor who's funding the open source project, and then the open source project is being used, let's say out in the field, and there's an ecosystem emerging around it. That's a great model as long as your donors continue to vote to donate. But we've seen that there's the capricious nature of humanitarian investments these days, and and do you actually get stability and long-term viability in that? So I see other projects where maybe the funding is now dried up, and whereas I'm not sure that that model works. It can work as long as your donors, keep donating, but it can also, if you're talking about 5 or 10 years, or 15 years, or 30 years, then you have to ask yourself, is that actually sustainable, and what's my risk? I don't know. Elizabeth, I saw you fidgeting. Is that unfair? Um, is it, or I
no,
have another question if you,
is that unfair? honestly, I thought that was kind of rich coming from a U.S. like from the U.S. Um, so yeah.
No, that's a fact. Like, yeah, just look at how we've cut so much funding from the U.S. that now things like IT can't be a priority when we're in such a crisis. And so we've seen actually funding for IT projects like digital identity are eroding.
Well, I
Yeah,
think this is why local capacity is so important, and I'll let Andrew build on it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I want to say.
So, Mike, I'd like to maybe also draw similarity with export controls on the side of commercial entities. So, say for example, I mean, similarly, the funding could dry up for an open source system, but if you're having a proprietary system and tomorrow your country is on a blacklist for
yeah,
exporting to that, then all of a sudden you're in a similar problem. So again, to what Elizabeth alluded to, it's that we're not the whole point of building capacity, like I mentioned, is to have options. Is to say that we want to reach a point where it's no longer capacity for digital identity is a commodity, right? So I can get it from Rwanda if I'm a Rwandan government official, or I can go to a neighboring country, or I can go to Europe and get it. But at the end of it,
mm,
if I do want to keep it within my borders, I have the option to do that. Right now, for the most part, that does not exist, and that's where the lock-in aspect comes from, and that's what we're trying to address with the hackathon.
yeah. I'd actually like to address that a little bit. Um, Digital identity software is not a commodity. We can't turn it off here and turn it on over there. These investments, these systems take years to put into place, and then they're interconnected to other systems, and each of those integrations takes a year. So you can't even go. It's very hard. This is not the switching costs are very high. Um, so that would be my first point, which is that although I see, with our OpenID Foundation representative here, I'm the first one to say use open standards, but I'm also realistic to say that these infrastructures, even though they implement standards, have some very specific configurations and deployments, especially when you're talking about five nines infrastructure and multi-data center and failover. It starts to get complicated, and persistence and caching and saving money and all the stuff that goes into this. Um, and so, but the other thing I wanted to mention was, okay, so Glue is our software is a commercial distribution of an upstream open source project. The upstream open source project is governed by the Linux Foundation. It's called the Janssen Project. We have a Red Hat-like model where we take that upstream, which is under a different brand like Fedora, let's say, and we sell a commercial distribution called GlueFlex. Um, so I agree with your assessment in a way that the problem isn't so much the commercial relationship, because actually without a commercial relationship, the IT department of the government can't engage. They need to make an investment based on 5 years, and they need a commercial partner on the other side of that. So the commercialization is actually necessary. Um, but what I do see is that what open source has been is that it's been an engine for innovation. So if you're saying to me the reason that we want this development methodology is because we don't want to use old crappy software that never gets updated, that I actually agree with, and that's the reason we made Glue open source, and we believe that open source drives innovation. And even today, by the way, Glue has more OAuth endpoints and OpenID features than any other platform. So we have continued to innovate more than our competitors. But in terms of the commercial side of it, are we going to get extorted? I think you still need a commercial relationship. And the other area you sort of alluded to was about sovereignty, let's say data sovereignty. The ability to say, okay, screw you, vendor, we're taking this to open source, we're forking it, we're maintaining our own. That maybe exists in the hypothetical, but even in the United States, you don't see North Dakota like forking a project and going it themselves. Like This doesn't exist in the United States. Like in the state of Texas, where I'm from, no one operates. The state of Texas doesn't operate. It's given to Deloitte, who gives it to a vendor. Like nobody. We don't have local. We rely on third-party commercial for that. So I
Yeah.
don't know. That was a lot, but so some of your thoughts on
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Mike, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the, the Ethiopian digital identity system called FIDA.
Hmm.
But
I haven't heard of
so
it.
it's all right. So it's the government of Ethiopia took the time to develop a room full of engineers that are just focused on learning the MOSIP system, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, yeah. We've had most
Yeah.
of
So the
Ramesh and has been on 2 times,
yeah
and also yeah. Anyway, yeah,
yeah.
we were big fans of Mosip here. Yeah,
Yeah, so I'd say FIDA is a poster for what could be, in my opinion. And they took MOSIP, this open source platform, and then customized it. And to your point, they did not do it only with the government. They also had certain commercial partners that helped them to develop a working, a functioning digital identity system
yeah,
with resident touch points. And like I mentioned, this is an open question and very happy to explore it. But it's something that also I'd like to be able to give an answer and say this is the model, this is the commercial model for sustainable secure digital
yeah.
identity at some point. Yeah.
Mosip is funded by Gates Foundation and 2 other foundations, by the way. So it's also donor funded. Um, and they are doing sort of the last mile, which is enrolling citizens, um, and sort of so you could think of it like when you they go out and they collect biometrics from people, identify people, take that back, upload it to a database, um, and it sets the stage for being able to deliver services because you have a single identity or credential for people. Um, but it is an interesting example. MOSIP also takes a lot of integration. Um, so it's not easy to set up MOSIP. People complain about how hard it is, but it is a fairly complex problem they're solving. Um, and MOSIP, I think, has economies of scale. It's very well backed. They have revenue visibility, I guess, for a while. But I actually attended. The DPGA has an event. I attended the event in Addis. I was also FOSDEM is an open source conference in Brussels every year in February. We had a DPGA table which I sat at, and I got to talk to a number of product owners in the DPGA. And what I see is a consistent mismatch between the product owners, let's say in the digital public goods sectors, and the end users, um, where, in my opinion, the product owners should be setting the expectation that in order to use this software, we're going to have to share costs, and the general messaging is it's going to be free, and that mismatch in messaging is causing problems with the digital public goods product owners because they're not getting the funding commensurate to the value that they're delivering. So I think that the mindset of the ecosystem needs to change, where you're going to say, okay, if we want sovereignty, we don't want to buy Oracle or Microsoft. We want something where there's a possibility that we could fork it and take it in house. So we want something that's going to give us the innovation of open source. We're going to have to help fund that. Because if all the participants who are using the software commensurately help fund whatever this thing is, then if you're a little island, you can pay X, and if you're India with 1 billion people, you pay slightly more because you're getting more value out of it. But I think you can build these ecosystems as long as the expectation is that there's a unit of value that we're going to send back to support this project. But as long as the expectation is that we're going to use it for free, then there's no way to solve this problem.
Yeah, and Mike, I just wanted to just touch on one. I think there's one assumption that I agree with what you said. There's one assumption that you're making though, which is that it's easy to have it's easy for the African countries to have these kind of knowledgeable conversations without they themselves understanding that the systems that they're talking about. I don't know if that makes sense. So for the
You need
most
to know
part,
what you don't know, or yeah, so the
exactly.
local capability is still important. I think that's true, and that's why I think the hackathon work is important. And the earlier you get people started, the better. There's a compound interest rate return if you get them started earlier. So, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
No, that's exactly it. Thank you.
Yeah. But let's talk about the economics of it for just a second. Do you agree that the end user is expected to be free? And do you think that maybe that's part of the problem about why it's hard building these open source ecosystems?
Truthfully, I mean, I haven't given much thought to that before, so I wouldn't be in a good position to answer that. Perhaps Elizabeth.
I don't know if I have insight into what the end users think, but I do know that I would 100% agree that ongoing maintenance of these open source tools is a real challenge. Ensuring that there is a sizable community of practice who understand the tooling and continue to improve on it.
Yeah, and here at Glue, we haven't figured out any way how to fund this except to find companies, mostly banks and governments, who value this highly and pay us a lot. And that helps fund the open source. But ultimately, I think that, so we see it as an enterprise software business, um, like, like, like it is. I mean, we're talking about countries building identity infrastructure. That's like the bridges and roads. That's going to be an expensive proposition. And these are big enterprise customers who are sophisticated, who put out RFIs and RFPs. This is the way they purchase anyway. Um, but I do think that, whenever I say this to the DPGA people, they say, no one said it's going to be free. Everyone knows that we're going to have to pay for it. But then actually, when when I went to the DPGA meeting and I actually talked to the countries who are using this software, and I asked them how much they thought it was going to be, they all said free. It's open source, and they equate open source with free. And I think that we're seeing that open source means freedoms. It means the freedom to fork the software, the freedom to use it in the way of the 10 open source freedoms defined. It doesn't mean free of cost, and that there is a way to maybe coalesce these open source ecosystems, but it's not. I don't believe it's donors. I think donors are like venture capitalists. They help catalyze, but they can't provide the ongoing, predictable, sustainable business model that will get these projects the money they need to provide the innovation that you want.
I think that's why that planning for this and really understanding the model is really important at the outset of a donor-funded project.
Yeah. We're a little over on time, which we rarely go, but so let's switch into last thoughts. Elizabeth, since you have the stage, last thoughts?
I guess my final thoughts that I would leave the community. So I guess I'd be speaking to standards communities of practitioners that I work with, efforts aimed at driving interoperability, the digital public infrastructure communities that I work with. I think it's really important to hear what Andrew was talking about and Afsana at the beginning of this conversation, which is, if we think we're building global solutions, we need to find contextually relevant use cases and find teams of people like these amazing people here to innovate with and connect with. And so I'm really excited that you centered the work of this hackathon today, Mike. Thank you.
Asfana, I want to give you the next last thoughts as our hackathon winner, and we dragged you into a conversation you probably didn't want to have about vendor lock-in. But any last thoughts?
Yeah, so first of all, the conversation was very interesting. And coming from young talent, I would just say my last thought is encouraging them and then having them look at the problems in their communities, which I think the vendor lock-in comes in that area where these young talents basically would have to figure out what the problems are in their context and then providing solutions for those problems, and also collaborating to co-create, because from this conversation there's some thoughts that came out in terms of there's this support that is out there, like open source projects, even if they're not completely free, which most people think, especially from the software engineer's perspective. But they are out there. So basically, reading out the guidelines and standards and using them. And so, yeah, figure out the problems and then find the solutions for them and go for help that's out there.
Awesome. And Andrew, last thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity and interesting conversation. And I'd be remiss, I think, if I didn't end on a call for support. So this hackathon has had about 600 students through its doors, and all of these are eager and capable students that looking for opportunities and there's so many ways to support the hackathon before, during, and after. As mentor, judges, identity systems that we can prototype on top of, offering internships, scholarships, research opportunities, and so on. So please do check out the Digital ID Hackathon, and we're very happy to connect.
Awesome. Well, I can't imagine. I think it's a great idea. I actually would like to see more hackathons. With that, I will announce the next episode. Kevin Campman is returning for the second time. We're going to talk about function-based access control. And with that, I will thank the audience and thank the guests. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Asana. Thank you, Elizabeth. And see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. See you.
Thanks for having us.